The other thing that appears to be sort of happening now, the other unknown at the start of this process that is now becoming known, is what had been a very open question as to how Trump supporters would respond to the arrest and indictment of the former president. You may remember what Trump first said when he announced to the country that he believed he would be indicted and arrested. Do you remember what his first statement was? He had a declarative demand to his supporters. He said, protest, take our nation back. We must save America. Protest, protest, protest. You know what didn't happen? That didn't happen. And that was a couple of weeks ago now when Trump first said that he would be arrested. He demanded that his supporters get out in the streets, that they protest in response to the threat to arrest him. That did not happen. Nobody protested. And you could say, okay, maybe that's because Trump was wrong about when he was going to be indicted, when he was going to be arrested. He wasn't, in fact, arrested that Tuesday when he said he was going to be. So maybe that's why the protests didn't emerge. Well, that day that he said he was going to be arrested, in fact, passed without him being indicted or arrested. But then last week, the day happened. We learned late in the day on Thursday that Trump had been indicted. And Trump's lawyers confirmed that he had been indicted. And then the DA's office in New York confirmed that he had been indicted. And then we learned that tomorrow, Tuesday, he will be arrested. He will be arraigned. But still, nobody really protested. I mean, a handful of people showed up and waved flags or whatever at Mar-a-Lago, but it wasn't anything that constituted an event by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we've had headline after headline after headline after headline saying that everybody is bracing for mass protest by Trump supporters. But it's not happening. At least thus far, it's not happening. And that itself is an interesting political fact now. That's an interesting political known outcome here. I mean, he specifically called on his supporters to come out and protest on his behalf, to save America, to protest, protest, protest. The New York Times specifically reporting over the weekend on a planned New York City homecoming protest on Trump's behalf at Trump Tower this morning, Monday morning in New York City. Well, whatever the New York Times was expecting in terms of the Trump homecoming protest at Trump Tower, it was like 3 people. I mean, this was the headline in Politico yesterday. Lone MAGA supporter awaits Trump in New York. And that's not hyperbole. It was that whole story was basically a profile on the one guy, the single guy who turned up at Trump Tower to support Trump yesterday. And then today, the big homecoming protest in support of Donald Trump. This was the headline at New York Magazine today. Trump supporters in Manhattan are outnumbered by reporters. Here's the lead of that story. Quote, one South Brooklyn resident who sells MAGA merchandise and medical software for a living had organized a homecoming for the former president ahead of his arraignment tomorrow. The man was hoping for a strong turnout. Roger Stone, after all, had amplified his rally announcement. But just a handful of supporters actually showed up. I mean, it's one thing for people to not come out and protest in support of you, right? It's one thing for people to not come out and protest in your defense. But when you specifically ask them to, when you in fact command them to, and they don't, what does that say about you? I mean, Trump last year said if any prosecutor indicted him, the United States would have, quote, the biggest protest we have ever had. He said in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Atlanta, and elsewhere, we are going to have in this country the biggest protest we have ever had. He said in January last year that would be the result of any indictment of him in any of those jurisdictions. In September, he said it again. He was asked if he'd be indicted. He said in response, I think if it happened, I think you'd have problems in this country, the like of which perhaps we've never seen before. I don't think the people of the United States would stand for it. Now we know the people of the United States are standing for it, it turns out. And, we'll see what tomorrow's like. We will see whether there is a, massive millions of people fill the streets, pro-Trump protest on the streets of Manhattan tomorrow. Maybe there will be. Who knows? But he asked people to protest, protest, protest in response to news of his indictment. And so far, his requests, his demands, his certain predictions that Americans would turn to the streets in record numbers on his behalf, numbers never seen before, people protesting against his indictment and protests like we've never seen before in America. So far, his people are not doing what he told them to do and what he confidently said they would do. But who knows? Who knows? We'll see what happens tomorrow. And like we have been reporting on this show, like I have been trying to sort of convey in terms of my perception about how this is going to go, there's still lots to come. I mean, this is the start of a legal process, which, if it goes terribly for him, will likely end with him, being fined for something that his lawyer already went to prison for. It's going to take a long time. New York court proceedings always take a long time. New York court proceedings in white-collar crime brought by very litigious guys often take forever. It's going to take a long time. And even in the short term, it's going to be a lot of motions. It's going to be a lot of legalese. And it's actually going to be mixed up with a lot of other legal processes. I mean, here we are at the beginning of April. What's Trump's month going to look like? Right? This week, he's in New York to be arraigned and arrested tomorrow. Next week, he has to be in New York again to be deposed in the $250 million civil fraud suit that the New York Attorney General has brought against him and his adult children. The week after that is when the Fox Dominion case is supposed to go to trial. If the disclosures thus far in that trial are anything to go by, that will mean, among other things, lots more headlines about the most influential right-wing media figures in the country secretly hating Trump's guts and telling people behind the scenes when nobody's watching how dumb and terrible and wrong Trump is. That'll be a nice week for him. Then the week after that, the E. Jean Carroll case goes to trial, in which he's accused of raping E. Jean Carroll and then lying about it. I mean, that's what April looks like in his calendar. That's what the next 4 weeks are like for him in his calendar. So who knows? Maybe one of those things will be a flashpoint. Maybe at some point this month, 1 million Americans will flood the streets of New York, cheering his name and burning cars or something. But so far, there's no sign of anything like that, despite his confident predictions that that's what his supporters would do.